Hello and welcome to Risk at Work, Risk Connect's educational web series. I'm Scott Fenstermaker. I'm the head of digital marketing at Risk Connect. Today we're going to be talking about building a business case for GRC, which is to say expressing the exact value of GRC to your specific organization. You know, the world is only going to get to be a more complex place, and the tracking and automation needs and reporting needs of risk are only going to get more demanding as we go forward. And now has never been a better time to step back and assess whether you feel you have the program and the support partners you need, not just for now, but taking your organization into the future. We have the perfect person to talk about this with us. The GRC man himself is with us, and we are going to discuss together today topics such as how to assess where you are in your current risk program, what you want your future state to look like, and then talking about how to express all types of value of a good GRC program to leadership. Before I introduce our guest today, a couple of housekeeping points. Number one, if you have questions for our guest, please put them into the question prompt in the webinar software. We will try to get to them during the presentation. If we don't answer that question during the presentation, we will respond to you directly with an answer to your question from our guest today. Also, if you signified that you're interested in CPE credit for attending this webinar, watch your inbox. After we're done here today, you'll receive a short quiz. You answer a couple of questions, you fill it out, you send it back to us, and we will respond to you with your CPE certificate. All right, we're lucky to have him back. The man who, if he didn't necessarily invent GRC itself, certainly invented the way that we name it and talk about it today. Our guest is Michael Rasmussen. Michael is the GRC pundit at GRC 2020 Research. He has over close to 30 years in the field as an internationally recognized keynote speaker, author, and advisor on GRC programs. He helps companies design architectures and make GRC processes in order to become more effective, efficient, and agile. I can't think of a better guest to talk about this topic today. Please welcome Michael Rasmussen. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a cold but blue sky day here in Milwaukee.
Cold down here too. I was just going to ask, Michael's famously from Milwaukee, and so whatever we have here in Chicago, he has it, about the same, but maybe minus about 5 degrees. And so I was just wondering if he was experiencing the same cold snap we were. The season doesn't seem to be able to decide what it wants to be yet.
Yep.
All right. So we're talking about the business case for GRC. And we have a couple of discussion points that we want to get to. So I want to ask you to kind of lead it off. So why don't you sort of introduce the concepts that you want us to think about, and maybe start off with discussion on taking a look back and having an organization perhaps see where it is currently.
Certainly. And that's what we're going to call the current state. We'll talk about the future state in a few minutes, but in order to sort of define where we're going to go and how we're going to get there in building that business case, it requires that we have a good, clear, thorough understanding of what the current state of governance, risk, and compliance is in our organization. So I'd like to set some expectations here. First off, everybody watching this webinar is doing GRC today. I don't care if you call it GRC, IRM, ERM, ORM, ABC, XYZ, or don't even have an acronym for it. And many of you probably don't even call it anything. But I don't think anybody listening to this is going to say we lack governance, we can care less about risk, and we're ignorant of compliance. Every organization has some approach to governance, risk, and compliance. And that's your current state. It can be rather ad hoc, firefighting. We're doing something when somebody's screaming at us like a regulator or auditor, or it can be very defined, integrated, and agile. But you have a current state because you're doing something for governance, risk, and compliance, whether you use that acronym or not. And so that's what we're talking about, measuring the current state. How messy is it? What's out there? Another thing I want to say is GRC is something organizations do. It's not something it buys. Governance, risk management, compliance are actions and activities of the organization. It is not something we just go out and purchase and all of a sudden we have GRC. There's technology for GRC, like our host today, Risk Connect, and there's significant value, and that's why we're talking about a business case. But at the end of the day, GRC is about activities and actions and behavior of the organization. Technology automates that to make it more efficient and agile. For example, one large insurance company called me up several years ago, and it quite frustrated me. They said, "We just bought GRC. Now come and tell us how to do GRC." That's putting the cart before the horse. What are you doing now, and what are you trying to change? Why did you purchase that technology? Where are you headed? It seems like they just randomly purchase technology just to figure out some destination later. And so we're trying to correct that in today's webinar. So we need to talk about the current state before we can build that future state. And that current state is navigating chaos in most organizations. I haven't met one lately that isn't true. But the physicist Friedrich Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. It's an integrated risk world. What starts off with one risk exposure cascades into other risk exposures. I've used before on these risk at work series, the example of COVID-19. What starts off with a health and safety risk impacts IT security risk from the work from home environment, privacy risk in the work from home environment, increased risk of fraud, uncertainty to objectives of the organization, increased risk of bribery and corruption and modern slavery. It's an interconnected risk environment. We have to see that. But unfortunately, so many people are managing risk in a lot of silos. It reminds me of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. The sprawling mansion that was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build then. That's one very expensive house today when you calculate inflation. It took 38 years to build, had 140 some different builders, and it had no design, no blueprint, no architect. At the end of the day, it has staircases that go up or down to nowhere, doors that open to walls or 20-foot drops. It makes no sense. But that's a lot of your GRC programs today. That over the last 38 years, you've had 147 different builders of GRC doing their little thing without the big picture. There's no design, no blueprint, no architect. IT security's done its thing, and finance and accounting internal control has done its thing, environmental's done its thing, and insurable risk has done its thing, and health and safety has done its thing, and corporate compliance has done its thing, and some have used software, some have used document spreadsheets and emails, and it's a mess. It's the Winchester Mystery House of GRC. But today's organization needs to be able to see the tree as well as the forest, that individual risk as well as the interconnectedness of risks and objectives, and be able to see not just the individual tree, but the forest. But the challenge is we also need to be able to see the leaves and the branches as well. That transaction could lead to the greater fraud risk, which could lead to other risks in the organization. That behavior of that manager from could cross the line of harassment and discrimination and things, can cascade and impact broader harassment and discrimination, build a culture and impact the whole forest. So it's the tree, the forest, but it's also the leaves and the branches. Those little details matter. That vulnerability on that IT system can cause significant exposure. That insecure connection to that vendor, third party, or even like an HVAC vendor, going back to the Target breach several years ago, or the sensor in a fish tank that led to a significant breach of data in a casino. Those little things matter. So it's also about the leaves and the branches as well. But a lot of organizations are approaching governance, risk, and compliance. Again, you're doing GRC, whether you call it GRC or not. A lot of organizations are approaching it with manual processes and loads of documents, spreadsheets, and emails, what I call the inevitability of failure. For example, one firm in managing and reporting all their different risk events, cases, incidents, investigations to the board of directors, they're spending 200 hours to build one report for the board annually. So not even individual case reports, not even quarterly reports and other reports. Just one report annually cost them 200 hours to build because they had to comb through and aggregate and tabulate all this information from documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And to find out the last year they did it in manual processes, that they had a risk issues that started 11 months ago that were completely out of control now. That's not managing risk. That's reacting to risk. And right now, there's a current state, 200 hours to build one report. You start adding up all the other reports and costs and all this, it was astronomically significant. 200 hours to build one report. Now, their future state, when they move to software in this space, it now takes them less than a minute. Now, you can build a huge ROI just on that. But there are so many other things that poured into it. A mid-sized financial services firm that I worked on their RFP did an internal study of their risk, compliance, security, and audit resources, their staff time. Found out that 80% of their staff time was actually chasing and managing documents and emails and not managing risk. There's a significant cost to the organization right there, where 80% of our time is spent managing documents, spreadsheets, and emails and chasing things that are halfway filled out or not filled out instead of actually managing risk. That's significant. In the area of like policies, I worked on the business case for a global European bank. And in their context, they had one policy that required to get updated because of a regulatory change. It took 6 months to get updated, went through 75 reviewers in a linear fashion of document check-in and check-out. In an environment with global banks dealing with 257 regulatory change events every business day coming from Thomson Reuters, and even if just a very small fraction impacts a policy, you can't be taking 6 months to get a policy updated. And these manual processes with emails and things getting missed. And, this is the inevitability of failure. This isn't managing risk and compliance. This is reacting to risk and compliance. So governance, risk, and compliance done in many current states, maybe your current state is actually really good, but in many current states, it's not effective, not efficient, and not agile. It's this OSEG GRC illustrated graphic here on the left, where what I call Dante's Inferno of GRC, where there's unnecessary complexity, wasted information, wasted resources, high cost, duplication and redundancy, fragmentation, things slipping through cracks, because everybody's going in different directions. It takes 200 hours to build a report. 80% of our staff time is chasing things. The line of business is often screaming. This week, it's a SOX 404, attestation and assessment. Next week, it's a business continuity assessment. The week after that, it's an IT security one. The week after that, it's an operational risk assessment. And they're looking at this, the line of business is saying, half these questions in this assessment are the ones I answered last week in that assessment. It's a complete waste of time and resources. And so we have regulatory risk and business change has more than doubled in the past 5 years. In some cases, it's tripled, like with regulatory change, but processes and staffing have not. This results in time-consuming processes that our staff are more triage mode, just trying to put out fires and not actually managing risk, but just they're firefighting. It results in an inability to scale to increase change and requirements. And maintaining GRC slows the organization down as it scrambles to manage change in the organization. So it's not agile. It's not efficient, not effective, and not agile. These inefficient processes create critical resources and constraints. You have multiple sources of change and intelligence that consume resources. Changes are inconsistently logged in documents and spreadsheets and sent in emails. A lot of times it might not even be logged at all. The organization does not have a consistent approach to assess impact and prioritize action items. And emails fly about, slip through the cracks, get filed away, forgotten, they're not responded to, and that's all a challenge. That's the current state in many of your organizations. So I'm going backwards here. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to find our GRC charter and purpose. We need to allocate responsibilities, define common processes. All this is absolutely critically important. We need to be able to discover and do a good inventory of what our current processes are, the technology being used, the overhead. Like going into COVID-19, I had an insurance company that told me, we've got a problem. We're moving people to a work from home environment. There's a lot of unrest and instability. We're laying off people. And in this time, we need to communicate, a home office IT security policies. We need to communicate home office privacy policies. We need to communicate the home office expense policy. We need to remind people that if because they're on Zoom and team meetings, that they have to behave themselves in context of harassment, discrimination, just as if they were in a corporate office and all this. And they said, we found out we had 28 different policy portals in the organization. IT's got theirs, and HR's has got theirs, and sales has got theirs, and accounting's got theirs. They had 28 different policy portals. Some were file shares, some were SharePoint sites, some were commercial software. I mean, that's an example here of, a technology mess where we have all these different portals. And they said, we need a singular portal for policies, to define their future state, their current state, 28 policy portals or file shares moving to one. So we need to really get a good inventory of our existing processes and technology that supports these processes. So the questions to ask is, what do you already have in place? Who owns and maintains these systems and technology and processes? Who operates them? What do they really do? I mean, you might find that, IT is managing risk and compliance and document spreadsheets and emails, and compliance is doing something with a homegrown database for managing compliance events and incidents and things. But then maybe insurable risk is using Risk Connect. And it's working really well. And Risk Connect does these other areas. Why don't we expand on that? So getting that good current state can lead to outcomes of not only where things are being done badly, but also departments that might be doing things really good, and we can expand on that and leverage that as well. And so that's some of the things to consider. So in closing on the current state, here's some key questions to ask to determine about your current state. Does your organization have enough information to make decisions about the future of the company when you don't have a clear view of risk that impacts critical business operations and processes? Does the organization know its risk exposure at the enterprise, business process, and technology levels, and how that risk interrelates and interconnect, particularly with objectives? How does the organization know it is managing and mitigating risk effectively in the context of the business to achieve business goals? And can the organization accurately gauge the impact of risk on business strategy, objectives, and operations? Adding a question specifically to Risk Connect, you can ask, how do we understand our insurance in the risk transfer aspects of addressing risk in the context of operational risks? Does the organization get the information it needs to take timely action to risk exposure to avoid or mitigate loss in situations of noncompliance? Does the organization monitor key risk indicators across key IT systems, business processes, objectives, and information? And does the organization optimally measure and model risk in a business context? So that's the story I paint for the current state and going out there and discovering that. I'll pause here, Scott, to see what thoughts and questions you might have.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was watching your slide on the future state, how it's not agile, not efficient, not effective. Something occurred to me that I wanted to observe that I think is probably correct. It's not only that it's not those things, but your organization is probably in a vicious cycle downwards when you think about how people are reacting to these things. They'll take the case that you just spoke about, where somebody is saying that half of the questions that I am answering in this assessment are the exact same questions that I answered last week in that previous assessment. That's not only not effective, but that's actually building cynicism towards the whole process. That's probably also limiting transparency in the future, because people are more likely to give up on these institutions that you're trying to build rather than necessarily being transparent and giving what they think is wasteful action. So having processes that are not leading anywhere, to use to regain your metaphor, are probably not just a steady state of not effective. They are probably becoming less and less effective as people get more and more disenchanted with them, right? Could you comment on that? Is that your experience too?
Oh, most certainly. In a case in one global insurance company, well, more insurance services and things, that whole scenario that I painted was exactly from them, where I've heard it time and time again, but what stood out with this one was the line of business screaming. They said, this is a mess. It wasn't the second and third line function saying that we have to get a GRC strategy and technology and platform. It was the line of business. They're saying, you're assessing us to death, and you're asking the same questions this week that you asked us last week, but for a slightly different angle and purpose. In that particular case, it was the line of business that forced the whole change in strategy upon the organization, because
Exactly.
because it adds additional layers of complexity. If it wasn't the line of business in that case, other cases, it just means the culture, they just give up. It's like, risk and compliance, they're the corporate cop, they're just additional layers of bureaucracy. Get away from me.
I remember at our one of our past user conferences, I think it was there's one of our customers. It gave a whole talk actually about proactively managing the experience of the first line in data gathering. So not just having a non-dysfunctional program for that, but actually taking the time to design it the way Apple designs an app that has one button that you click, right? So to make it as efficient as possible, and the managers of the first line, very eager to share data and contribute and do that, knowing that thought went into the process of how they share that data and making it efficient and effective for them, right? Um, so this is obviously an enormous assessment process when you're talking about the current state. It's taking a step back and actually turning over rocks to figure out how the current state is functioning. I'm assuming that it's probably a bit of a heavy lift in most cases to get visibility and cooperation into some of these areas where these things have never been analyzed before. So could you comment a little bit on the best ways, if it's not forthcoming, for example, to get the kind of visibility and cooperation you might need to answer some of these questions?
So say that once more.
I was if I was I'm
Yeah.
assuming that it's difficult to get, yeah, transparency into some of
Yeah.
these areas, right? And so I was just curious if it's difficult to get, if it's not forthcoming, how do we organize this process? How do we have leadership around it? How do we get buy-in from it so that we get this information?
Yeah, and that's some of the things we'll be talking about in a little more detail in the upcoming, areas of pitfalls as well as success in this area. But there are challenges because some people dig in their heels.
Mhm.
Some people, it's like, I've done my job this way for the last 20 years. I don't want to change. So leave me alone. You get those departments that just are uncooperative. Sometimes they're uncooperative because they don't want to share how bad their data and how much it's actually costing the organization to build reports, like 200 hours to build one report and things. They're scared of disclosing some of this stuff too.
Mhm. Yeah, I would imagine. Let's go ahead and jump right into future state here and make sure we get everything in.
Yeah. So the future states the to be vision, where we want to define, enhance, evolve an enterprise architecture that supports governance, risk, and compliance needs and requirements, where we can leverage technology investments like our host Risk Connect where possible, and look for ways to consolidate other like manual approaches and other technologies so that we can get a core system across this area, what I call an architecture. And what's important to note is GRC is broad. When you unpack all the areas of credit risk, market risk, commodity risk, and environmental and health and safety, there's no one platform on the planet that does absolutely everything, but there can be a core platform that is the glue to bring things together, and allow best of breed where it makes sense. You have your little talk bubbles here. GRC needs are now embedded into the core business processes and enabled by enterprise systems. We've made it easier for people to stay aligned with our policies and values. IT is saying, now that we have rationalized our GRC architecture, I see several old components that we can get rid of, old, clunky, costly software, or sometimes in-house commercial, in-house developed software that's just too much. I mean, I've worked with a very large utility that has an in-house approach for investigations, case management, incident management with 200 investigators and 50 different case types on the system. They built it all in house, and it's costing too much just to manage that. And then you have GRC again saying this will give me good visibility into the information, processes, and controls and evidence that I need to effectively govern, manage risk, and ensure compliance. We need this to be vision. What are we trying to achieve? Building that future state of what things should look at and look like. I mean, and I like 2-year plans. I think in today's world, things are changing too much to go to 3, 4, or 5-year plans. So what's our current state today? And then what's our 2-year plan for change where we want to be? So we need to aim for GRC agility, that optimized approach. If organizations can align and optimize processes supported by the integration of technology and build their content and GRC programs around a core platform, it makes things more effective. With greater understanding of changing requirements and their impact enables the organization to be proactive in gathering, organizing, assessing, prioritizing, communicating, addressing, and monitoring change and its impact on the organization, risk change, compliance change, and so forth. This allows the organization to demonstrate evidence of good compliance and risk practices. But not only does it make them more effective, it makes them more efficient. The organization can now optimize human and financial capital resources, time saved, money saved, to consistently address change and regulatory and risk change, enable sustainable management of resources. But it also makes us more agile, where it doesn't take, 200 hours to build a report to find out we had risk issues 11 months ago, or where policies are taking 6 months to get updated. Good technology enables agility, where we have good insight data, where GRC enables a dynamic and changing organization to understand how regulatory and risk environments affect business change and how to manage that and keep up with it and not just constantly chase it. But that brings us to the official definition of GRC, and this is found in the OSEG GRC capability model, that GRC is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance part of the definition. They could be entity-level objectives, division, department, process, project, or even asset-level objectives, or even relationship objectives and third-party relationship. But what are the objectives? And then we address uncertainty. That's the risk management piece of the definition. ISO 31000 says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. You can see the relationship. And act with integrity. That's the compliance piece. Not just compliance to laws and regulation, but compliance to our values, our ethics, and all that as well. So GRC is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. Putting this together, governance sets the direction and strategy for the organization to reliably achieve the objectives that are set. Governance sets the context for risk management. Without context, risk management fails. We don't just wake up one day and say, I feel like doing a risk assessment. What should I do a risk assessment of? And grab the fishbowl or whatever and pull something out of it and say, that's what I'll assess. Governance sets the context for risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives according to ISO 31000. So it's the governance and setting those objectives that gives us the context to assess risk and uncertainty within. So risk management seeks to manage and understand uncertainty by identification, assessment, and monitoring of risk within context to act on risk. And when we act on risk, we can accept the risk, we can avoid the risk, we can mitigate the risk, and we can transfer the risk. Now, that's an important one to point out there. So often, organizations focus on risk acceptance and mitigation. We completely forget in our GRC programs about risk transfer, like insurance, like our host, Risk Connect has one of the leaders in the whole risk transfer area of addressing risk. But that's a significant piece of any risk assessment is also, do we have the right insurance and coverage as well? And so we do our risk assessment, and let's talk about the risk mitigation. When we mitigate, when we look at a risk and we have our, let's say our heat map, for those that like heat maps, we have our inherent risk here. And that inherent risk is too much risk. And so we implement control 1, control 2, and control 3. And that brings it down to this residual risk, which we find acceptable. We just did our risk assessment. We get sign off. Yes, that's the right level of risk. We implement those controls. Now, if we walk away, who says that those controls are ever actually implemented, that they're actually even operational and effective? That's the job of compliance. Compliance and control functions aims to see that the organization acts with integrity in fulfilling its regulatory, contractual, and self-imposed obligations, but also compliance follows through on risk treatment plans to assure that risk is being managed within limits and the controls that are put in place to mitigate the risk are actually out there functioning and operational. Risk management is dependent on governance to set the context. Risk management is dependent on compliance for the follow through to ensure that controls are out there and operational. GRC is, to me, the best acronym and definition over IRM, ERM, ORM, because you can see how these flow together and work together. And it's like 3 legs to a stool. You take one of them away and you're not stable anymore. All 3 are essential. So organizations need to approach this future state, GRC by design. I do a whole workshop on this called Enterprise GRC by Design. And it's this whole idea of defining that future state. If you've modeled your current state, what does the ideal state look like? What does it look like? How do you address it? It could be a future state at a department level. It could be a future state at an enterprise level. And I prefer the enterprise, but just one story on the department level, a global high-tech hardware manufacturer. and that has been very deeply involved with OSEG over the years. They took this whole strategy from a compliance perspective. They say we had multiple compliance departments, and for this particular project, they had the chief ethics and compliance officer with the corporate compliance and ethics department, responsible for code of conduct, insider trading, bribery and corruption. They had the government procurement contracting office, responsible for compliance to working with the federal government. They had the internal controls and Sarbanes-Oxley compliance department for Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. And they had the import-export compliance department dealing with all the laws and sanctions and everything else. And they said, why can't we work together? We're not trying to consolidate these departments because these compliance departments work and function where they operate best, but how can we work together? And they came up, it's like, we got 4 different policy portals. We each have different case investigation systems and ways to assess compliance risk. Why can't we all share technology in this space and leverage a GRC strategy? They designed that and they executed on that. So building that future state involves a top-down approach. We don't start with technology. We first understand what is our strategy, what's our current state, what's our future state, what's our roadmap to get there, what are our common GRC management processes, like risk identification processes, risk assessment processes, risk monitoring processes, compliance assessment, control monitoring processes, incident case investigation, policy management processes, third-party vendor supplier management processes. What are all those processes? How should they ideally work within a department, but also across departments? And then what's the information architecture that's needed to support that, and what technology can support the complexity of our information architecture and deliver the value there. It means different roles have to come together to deliver on this, from risk management roles, internal control roles, corporate compliance and IT and internal audit, finance, line of business, other roles such as legal, environmental, health and safety, of course, ESG now as well as communication to the board of directors. And some of the questions that need to be asked in building this future state is who currently owns which risks? How do we prioritize risks? How are resources currently aligned to address priority risks? Is every risk area covered? Is there duplication? And getting these different departments and functions working together in that strategy. But part of that is building out that common vision. And that this can come forward in a GRC charter, which has a clearly defined GRC vision and mission statement. And I always like to start when I've spent like a whole afternoon with one insurance company, just helping them craft their vision and mission statement for GRC and wordsmith it. But in that case, I always like to start with the OSEG definition of GRC. That governance, risk, and compliance within our organization is a capability for the organization to reliably achieve its objectives, address uncertainty and risk to those objectives, and act with integrity and compliance in achieving those objectives. But what's your vision mission statement? And then what's your strategy for technology? What's your core solution? What other technologies feed into that? What are the different roles and groups involved, from corporate compliance and ethics and enterprise and operational risk to insurable risk to IT risk to project risk to audit? What's your timelines and projects and so forth? But that all gets us into the future state also does involve technology, because if you're trying to do this in documents, spreadsheets, and emails, things are going to break and not get fixed. And so here's the 6 generations of GRC technologies I've defined them. I first used the term GRC back in February 2002 when I was at Forrester. So I've been called the father of GRC, being the first to actually use the acronym. But I came out of a vendor briefing that showed the complexity of trying to manage controls and risks and policies and all this together in one system and bringing it together and actually making it efficient, effective, and agile. I said, this is exactly what I brainstormed that I wanted to see out there in the market when I was an IT security consultant in the 1990s. And I said, there's a whole market for this. What do we call it? And it came up with GRC. And so in that context, what also happened in February 2002 was Sarbanes-Oxley. And so for the first several years, it's what I call the Sarbanes-Oxley captivity of GRC, where GRC solutions were primarily being deployed for internal controls over financial reporting. Then about 2007, we entered the era of what I call enterprise GRC, which fulfilled my original vision for GRC, but it's like that second and third line functions and enabling them and getting them to work together across risk and audit, security, compliance, and so forth. But then we entered the era of GRC architecture because there wasn't one platform that could absolutely do everything. This is too complex. There could be the core platform, but it needs to integrate with other, databases and content feeds and external sources, as well as internal systems. Well, about 2017, 2018, I was getting a lot of complaints. The first generation of GRC software had a huge price tag on it, not just for implementation, but ongoing management and maintenance costs as well. And things broke on upgrades and people couldn't get to the next version. In fact, one of my favorite LinkedIn posts of the time was described an implementation of one legacy vendor in this space as to the lyrics of the song Hotel California, that they're stuck and can't get out. That after $500,000 in software licensing, $2 million in implementation fees, 2 years later, they're getting some basic functionality working. So we entered the new era of GRC 4.0, SaaS-enabled, cloud-enabled, low-code, no-code solutions that don't break on upgrades, that are easier to implement and maintain. And that's what I call agile GRC. And the subsequent generations, GRC 5.0 and 6.0, don't replace agile GRC. They extend it and build upon it. And we're in this era of cognitive GRC. And how do we leverage artificial intelligence and cognitive technologies, such as natural language processing, machine learning, predictive analytics, to further provide value here? And we're moving towards this future of business integrated GRC, where GRC becomes less and less of that additional layers of Band-Aid and more part of business processes. But we need that technology and information architecture that can take and distribute and disconnected GRC data points, integrate, map them, provide context, analyze relationships, and build out action items. And so that brings me to my new 2023 segmentation of the GRC technology market and what I use to help organizations with their technology strategy. What are the components you need? The horizontal items at the top, are things that you should look at enterprise-wide. You can still use them within one department from a department perspective, if that's all you have, but these are best looked at enterprise and scope across different departments and functions. So being able to manage strategy, performance, and objectives. Then you've got risk and resilience management, which includes enterprise and operational risk, operational resilience. It also includes project risk management, insurable risk, and all these different aspects. You've got compliance, ethics, and obligation management. If we're doing compliance assessments, regulatory change, you have policy and training management, internal control management, monitoring, and automation. For example, if you have an enterprise view of risk, like the second one from the top, well, that really necessitates you also have an enterprise view of internal controls, because you cannot do enterprise risk management without having an enterprise view of controls as well. And then issue reporting and case management, ESG management reporting. I mean, ESG, it requires a lot of different departments and functions to work across. It's not one department. And then audit management, analytics, and insurance. But now below that, you've got all the more department-focused implementations of IT GRC. Department focus, like IT GRC, which we also call IT risk management, but it's IT governance, IT risk management, IT compliance. You got third-party GRC, what some call third-party risk management, but it's more than third-party risk. It's also governance of those relationships. Are we achieving the objectives in relationships? So it's third-party governance, risk, and compliance. Finance GRC, dealing with Sarbanes-Oxley. Now, I just was in London, and it's all about UK SOX and the pressures coming from there this year, but it's dealing with internal controls of financial reporting and financial close processes, HR, environmental GRC, health and safety, quality, legal, privacy, identity, and we can go on, but it's those domain specific. So they're not enterprise focused, but they're more helping departments or specific topics in context of governance, risk, and compliance as well. So with that, back to you, Scott, for some perspective as well.
Well, thank you very much. So I think in our 20 minutes left, I think I want to go pretty efficiently into the discussion of business benefit, but I will highlight one point by way of emphasis that you made that I thought was interesting. You had 2 or 3 slides that talked about this future state conversation process as a kind of a coming together, different departments coming together in conversation and sharing and so forth. And you made the point that You gave one example of a couple of different departments of risk management that said, we're not going to consolidate, we're not going to make this one thing, but neither are we going to silo off anymore. We're going to share resources with each other. And I think it doesn't occur to people often enough that there is a middle way in between those things, that in between everything is in one department under one leader, centrally planned, and everything is anarchic and going in completely different directions with nobody talking to anybody. There is a kind of coordinated sharing of not only goals and incentives, but underlying data, definitions, things like that. And that's a little bit of the model that Risk Connect works with. Nassim Taleb in his writings compares it to the country of Switzerland, where the cantons are relatively powerful, but nevertheless, it's one country united in certain macro goals and objectives, but sharing amongst themselves in kind of a localized uh, um, authority rather than necessarily having everything centralized. And I wanted to pull that out and make sure that people are thinking about ways in which people can share and make sure that they're heading in the same direction without necessarily meaning that we're going all the way towards complete centralization. And so with that, yes, let's get right into business benefit, and we'll pick up the conversation on the other. I want to make sure that people get this information because this is really important.
Yep. Certainly. So first off, we need to be able to communicate what that strategy is and what the value and direction and is, and what to expect going forward. And so here's some key messages to communicate. First off, from a broad perspective, we'll get more narrow and specific in a few seconds here, what it is and why. And these are all hypothetical. These bullet points are just an example. You can completely change, manipulate, borrow, whatever you want, replace. But the organization is striving to establish a distinctive competence and trust in best-in-class GRC. This will enable the organization to treat risk and compliance more proactively and move with agility in our industry, whatever industry that is. To do this, the GRC group will develop a culture of GRC intelligence with a focus on GRC metrics. As a result, the Governance Risk and Compliance Program will enable GRC intelligence through people, process, and technology. The GRC program is focused on delivering value by aggregating enterprise risk and correlating core risk elements. We are concentrating on GRC competency, expertise in 5 focus areas, and aligning these focus areas allows us to work more strategically. What this means to our stakeholder community. Our key GRC focus areas allows us to evolve from risk identification through risk analytics to eventually what we're trying to achieve is risk intelligence. Number 1, we'll leverage working groups in policy, risk, and privacy through an active governance model. Again, you can change and replace any of this. We'll focus on enterprise risk analytics to develop a common risk ontology. We'll focus on risk and control management to ensure best practice compliance. We'll focus on integrated reporting and information through active dashboards. And we'll leverage a strong technology foundation like our host Risk Connect to integrate all this. For what this means to you, this is a collaborative process between stakeholders and the GRC team focused on value-based initiatives. Together, we analyze each process to determine where it can be best aligned, and together we create more value. What to expect going forward is working group participation to define this risk ontology and end-to-end process. There's some future 2000X date to transition the program further, opportunities to integrate new processes or even things like through mergers and acquisitions and other things into it, and so forth. But I think you get the picture of, where we define that future state. Now we've got to communicate what it is and why, what it means, what we're trying to achieve, and start to articulate that value. Now, there's a lot of different roles that get involved, and these roles have specific business benefits that they're trying to achieve. Governance functions like the board and others say that they want to ensure that sound governance structures are in place below the board so that the right information about the right issues is available at the right time. Governance wants good data and information rolled up within their context. Risk wants to be able to integrate risk management with strategic planning and maintain a 360-degree view of organizational risks and effectively allocate resources to address those risks. That's their business benefit. Ethics and compliance, their business benefit is to establish practices and a culture to prevent misconduct, inspire desired conduct, detect problems, improve outcomes. The finance department, often responsible for Sarbanes-Oxley and themes, their business benefit is to be able to reduce costs and optimize how you allocate capital to governance, risk, and compliance processes so that GRC is better aligned to the business. Audit and assurance functions want that business benefit to go beyond financial process and assess the design and operation of controls for governance, risk, and compliance and ethics efforts throughout the enterprise, particularly in the context of ESG. The legal department, their business benefit is identify and establish sound practices to address their legal risks and improve ability to detect and correct issues while improving ability to defend the organization. Core business processes out there, manufacturing processes, quality processes, environmental health and safety processes, HR processes, whatever it might be, they want to embed sound governance, risk, and compliance practices in all lines of business and core processes so that business owners and operators are accountable for success. And the IT department wants to address IT risk and compliance issues and the alignment of information technology to general GRC needs in the rest of the business. So in defining the business benefit, it's important to know who your stakeholders and groups are and what they can achieve out of this. What do they really want? Now, from a technology perspective, you want agile GRC technology that is highly usable. It has a lower cost of ownership, highly configurable, and doesn't break on upgrades. And that cost of ownership just isn't on implementation, but ongoing management and maintenance, can scale and adapt to the organization, integrate with other systems, and so forth. I measure this business benefit around the areas of efficiency, effectiveness, and agility. And agility can actually be broken out into resilience and agility. So we can actually have 4 components. But when I work on business cases for organizations, or even on value calculators for solutions like Risk Connect, it starts with that efficiency, which is traditional ROI. Time saved, money saved. Before it cost us in that current state this much time and money. Now, if we implement these changes to our strategy processes, but also our information technology architecture, we should gain these type of efficiencies. Before it took us 200 hours to build one report, now it takes us a minute. Those type of things. Effectiveness is greater accuracy, less things slipping through cracks, reduction in risk exposure, less likelihood of a compliance fine or penalty, and so forth. Effectiveness is greater completeness, accuracy, and more getting done. And in a sense, effectiveness is itself is a risk assessment. Let's use the context of Risk Connect. Implementing Risk Connect should have a bottom line impact on our risk exposure. Here's our inherent risk before Risk Connect. And the reasons why we are implementing Risk Connect is A, B, C. That actually should move that risk of our inherent risk to a residual risk after we implement Risk Connect to an acceptable level. To me, effectiveness really is a risk assessment itself, because we have our inherent risk, which is too much. We're trying to improve things here. We implement technology like Risk Connect that gives us to a residual risk. Doesn't eliminate all our risk. That's not possible. But it reduces our risk exposure because we have greater accountability and responsibilities, less things slipping through cracks. That's reduction in risk. And agility can be broken down to resilience, the ability to find issues and recover from them quickly and contain them before they become big issues, but also agility to keep up with a changing business environment as well. Now, some of the business benefits from a broad perspective, a strong, solid GRC strategy should help us achieve our business objectives, whether they're entity, division, department, process, project, or asset level objectives. It should ensure risk-aware setting of objectives and strategic planning, help define and guide our culture, increase stakeholder confidence, prepare and protect the organization while preventing, detecting, and reducing adversity and weakness, motivate and inspire desired conduct, stay ahead of the game, improve responsiveness and efficiency, and optimize economic return and value. And that brings me to the GRC maturity model, from the ad hoc to the agile. Again, everybody's doing GRC, so where do you fall on this? Ad hoc is that department that is reactive and fighting fires, and really only addressing GRC when somebody's screaming at them. Fragmented is where GRC is being managed and it's somewhat defined in structure, but it's a lot of manual processes, document spreadsheets, and emails. We're constantly chasing things. Managed is a mature department level, where we're leveraging technology and structured processes to have a really mature approach to like IT risk or operational risk or insurable risk, but it's within one department. Integrated is where we're starting to cross departments and we're looking at risk, but more from the hazard and harm point of view. Well, agile is we're putting things in a performance and business context and keeping up with change. So back to you, Scott.
Yeah, I wanted to ask on that maturity model. That's a good thing to spend a little bit of time on. I wanted to ask you for your opinion on how an organization's size might fit into their actual or desired maturity. Small businesses, we might expect them to perhaps be more ad hoc. If you're depending on this is all industry dependent, of course. So I'll grant you that. But all things being equal, there may be, fewer. Regulatory compliance factors that they might have to deal with. It's okay to be a little bit more reactive. And then at some point in your development as an organization, you realize that you need a step change to something else, and you realize that you need a step change. Is that necessarily true, or should all organizations aspire to agile GRC really without size being a factor?
I mean, I think we could all aspire to agile GRC. Every organization, I mean, even myself, in my small business, definitely want to be agile out there. And in some respects, agility is easier to achieve with a small organization because there's less to orchestrate. um,
Mhm.
but on the flip side, it means multiple people wear more hats as well, and so we can get challenges there as well. The larger the organization, the more complex it is, and the more often you have a lot of subcultures and things like that, and more corporate politics comes into play because of that complexity as well. And then the large organization can also span a lot of jurisdictions and operations, which adds other layers of complexity.
So when we talk about building a business case, we haven't really spoken to this yet, but we're talking about basically gearing up for a conversation with executive leadership, right? We say our process is here. We want it to be here. Here are and we break this out into efficient, effective, and agile, just like you're thinking. Here are the benefits to doing this going forward, and here are the benefits for every stakeholder that's going to be involved in this. Talk to me a little bit about how executive leadership teams typically react to those categories of things. I would guess that most of the ears would perk up on the efficiency portion of it, right? How much time and money are we going to be saving, right? I like the sound of that. But effectiveness, um, it may go underappreciated, because if you are a more effective risk management organization and you actually bring your residual risk down, you could theoretically flip around and take more strategic risk as an organization, because your appetite kind of stayed where it was, right? And so that could lead to more strategic risk and more profitability as an organization, which is something that executive leadership would or should be interested in as well. So talk to me a little bit about how they typically react and how they should react.
You hit the nail on the head there. And the efficiency gets business attention because it's an ROI, time saved,
Mhm.
money saved, and it impacts the bottom line of the business. But for effectiveness and agility, to really get home to the business, it's got to be put in a business context.
Mhm.
How does it help the organization reliably achieve business objectives? You put the effectiveness and agility in that context, and you get better business buy-in.
I see. All right, let's go to success and failure factors. We're at about 6 or 7 minutes.
Yep. So I'll just be quick on this one slide for you. Potential challenges and pitfalls. Of course, as I just saying, corporate politics. Some people dig in their heels. I've been doing compliance this way for the last 20 years. This is my job. Stay out of my business. Leave me alone. I don't want to participate. You get audits sometimes saying, we're audit. We need to be independent. You guys do your thing. We got to do our thing because we're audit. I say it again because that's exactly what they keep saying. And we need our own system and approach. Funny, I did a strategy day at an insurance company, and at the beginning of the day, I mean, in the room you had enterprise risk and corporate compliance and legal and IT risk and audit all in the room around the table. And audit was the biggest antagonist and said, we're audit. You guys do your thing. I shouldn't even be here today because we're independent. We can't be interacting with you on this stuff. And by the end of the day, audit was the biggest advocate for GRC, saying, well, if we had this type of data and insight and visibility and information, it would streamline our audits. We get more done. They'd be more accurate and thorough, and everybody be happy. Audit completely changed course in the matter of one day. But one of those challenges is corporate politics, people that don't want to participate. You have misaligned expectations, people go in different directions. And sometimes that's even with technology vendors. Another financial services firm and their GRC strategy, everybody wanted it, but everybody had their pet vendor. IT wanted this vendor, and enterprise wanted this vendor, and corporate compliance wanted this vendor. And there's no clear leadership to herd the cats, and everybody was going in different directions. You have limited resources because not enough has been put into the building the strategy in the process. Complex GRC data that technology, if you don't select the right technology, it can't really manage and leverage properly. You also have the problem of misaligned projects that we miss deadlines and things because we're taking on too much too quickly instead of spanning things out. Different requirements that aren't reconciled. All those are potential challenges. Some of the critical success factors is getting the right team on board with the right leadership that can advocate and get people on board working together, their openness and willingness to work together, providing that enterprise perspective, using facts, having a good business case with clear and compelling facts around efficiency, effectiveness, and agility that can tell that story for you.
Wonderful. I think that, yeah, your next slide is next steps. And I think that that's probably what I wanted to ask you about by way of bringing our threads together. Maybe just one question. So somebody's sitting in the audience here of Risk at Work. They're, very intelligent because they're a Risk at Work audience member. And they recognize themselves in what you've just said. Okay, my organization has some deficiencies in terms of having risk-related conversations between departments and processes that are a little bit, over-evolved and not really looked at very much. We could use an analysis of where we are right now and a good conversation about our future state. And I think it's time that we actually manage this a little bit more proactively. So I'm sitting there, this person's got a lot of excitement. They're really waiting to get started. What do you think is the best first step that somebody can take to kick this kind of journey off?
Well, that first step is going to be defining a good vision and mission statement. I mean, that's what binds all this together. And so to me, that first step, if somebody sees what needs to be done, how do we define a clear and compelling vision and mission statement? This is what we're trying to achieve. This is what it's about. That is the glue that brings all this together. From there, you do want to understand what that current state is, what's that future state being built around that vision and mission statement, and laying out your journey to get there. From there, you communicate that vision and mission, and you get the other team members on board. Maybe the person leading it is the chief risk officer, and they need to get corporate compliance and legal and IT and all these other health, human resources and procurement and all these other ones on board. But you use that vision and mission statement and that vision of our current state and what it's costing us to this future state, and you get the other team members on board, working together collaboratively and building that team. But then it's important that you have the right technology that can deliver on that vision. And if you're climbing a mountain and you only have enough equipment to get halfway up, and you have to come all the way back down to get more equipment, guess what? You're exhausted. It's a failed climb. You failed. You want to make sure that you have the right information technology architecture that not only can get you 3 months in, but can actually fulfill the vision that you're aiming for over the next 2 years. But then going back to one of those pitfalls I mentioned, you want to break things up into stages. You take on too much too quickly and you have missed deadlines and people are frustrated. You can't just run up Mount Everest. If you climb Mount Everest too fast, what happens is you die, literally. Your body has to acclimate to the altitude at certain levels. And if you have a large GRC project, you need to break it up into stages that are achievable. And so you don't miss those deadlines. But then you also have to be ready for change, because there's a lot of change in the world, from mergers and acquisitions to new regulations and laws to geopolitical risks to, pandemics and everything else we've been familiar with the last few years. We got to be ready to adapt as well. But what we're aiming for is that business integrated and aligned GRC with a clear and compelling business case that's built on a common vision and mission, that we're more aware of our risks because we're working together, that we're aligned, that we're more responsive to find issues and contain them, that we can be agile, that to navigate the environment with the developing risks and scenarios coming at us, but also to be resilient to recover from issues efficiently and get back on our feet and move forward, and do this in a way that is efficient in our use of human capital and financial capital.
One last question for you, Michael. Who should be leading an initiative like this? Is it a certain role within the organization? Is it a person whose role has certain characteristics? Who's the proper authority to lead a project like this?
Well, in some organizations, it is like financial services. I often see it's enterprise and operational risk leading. In life sciences and pharmaceutical environments, I often see it's corporate compliance and ethics. So by industry, there can be different roles that actually lead this across departments. But in general, I would say that what's more important is not where that role is or what title that role has, but does that role have the right visibility to the board and executives? And does that role have the right collaborative spirit and personality to be able to engage other departments? Because it's not all about one department. To truly do GRC, it means getting different departments working together. So the key person for this role to me is the one that can build bridges and work with other departments and functions and allow other voices to be heard and not just be dominated by one department.
I think that that's actually a great note to wrap this up on. Michael, this information is absolutely stellar as always. So I would like to thank you, our guest, for coming here today. I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for taking a little time out of their day and sharing it with me and Michael and going over this type of information. Please feel free to go to riskconnect.com and sign up for updates so that you can get information on future Risk at Work sessions with Michael Rasmussen, as well as other sessions and thought leaderships coming out, including please do check out the ebook, The Hunt for Hidden Risk, available at riskconnect.com. It's a synthesis of a great deal of wisdom from the Risk at Work program, including wisdom from Mr. Rasmussen himself. So I think that you will find that very helpful. If you set us specific questions during this time and they weren't answered during the course of the conversation, please watch your email. We will reach out to you with an answer from Michael. Also, once again, if you signed up and suggested that you wanted CPE credit for attending this webinar, please also watch your inbox and you will receive a short grouping of questions. Fill that out and return it to us, and we will get back to you with your CPE credit. If your organization is looking to have more conversations about how you can enhance your GRC processes and how you can enhance your GRC program, we invite you to reach out to a Risk Connect representative. Have a conversation with us, obviously after you've had a conversation with Michael, but I'm sure he would tell you the same thing. Have a conversation with a Risk Connect representative. Let them know what your current situation and your goals are, and we would be happy to help you in any way we can. This on the screen right now is how you can keep up with Michael Rasmussen with his LinkedIn presence and his newsletter at GRC 2020. And we hope you had a wonderful time. We hope that this information was valuable to you, and we will see you for the next installment of Risk at Work. Take care.